remember one time we hired this guy from California who claimed to be an expert painter. I mean, he had all this experience he told us about and a whole bunch of pictures of these custom cars he had painted. So, we took this guy and we put him in the spray booth. Well, I went in and I watched him, and I watched to make sure that he mixed the proper amount of reducer in with the paint and the proper amount of catalyst. And he looked at the spray gun and he says, "Oh, you guys use production spray guns." Well, I'm thinking, yeah, right. So anyhow, he starts spraying this car. And I'll tell you what, he looked like a ballerina. He's spraying like this, and he's spraying like that. In fact, I think he was spraying more paint out toward the air than he was toward the car. So, needless to say, the guy didn't last very long. But, with that said, if you don't get anything else from this video, get this. When you spray, when you have this gun in your hand, pretend that your arm is a robot. You want your motion to be parallel to the car, like this. You also need the gun to be 90 degrees this way. In other words, as you're spraying, it needs to be at the same attitude.
Note how this professional painter keeps the gun equal distant from the panel, and the gun is always parallel to the work surface.
So keeping the gun perpendicular and 90 degrees to the work surface is extremely important.
There are two reasons why you should trigger the gun at the end of each stroke. Remember how in the video on gun controls I described how the trigger has two positions. Let's take a look at that clip. The trigger has two positions. Pulling it partially back introduces air into the air cap without pulling back the needle. As you continue to pull the trigger back, the needle will start to move, opening up the tip so the fluid can flow. As the fluid hits the air already flowing through the cap, it is atomized or blown into small particles. The further you pull the trigger back, the more material goes onto your workpiece. Notice how at the end of each stroke I release the trigger to its first position, stopping the flow of material. In this example, it cuts down on the amount of paint being blown into the air. In other words, at that momentary point at which you change direction, there is no material being wasted. Watch my trigger finger. By watching this professional, we see the second reason for triggering the gun. If he did not trigger the gun at the end of each stroke, there would be a buildup of paint at this point. That would probably cause a run necessitating a redo. When I spray, I like to be able to see how the spray is hitting the surface, so good lighting is essential, especially with black. In my previous video, I stressed the importance of blowing off any dust and tacking your work surface. It is also a good idea to wet the floor. I've already applied the first coat on these drawers and have sanded them with 220 dry on an orbital sander. In this case, I'm looking for a mirror gloss finish, so it's important that I lay it down very wet. Always edge your panels first. I'm giving this a standard 50% pattern. That means with each pass of the gun, it is moved forward by 50% of the gun's pattern width. When this dries for several days, I'll lightly sand it with 800 grit, wet or dry, wet, and coat it with clear for a deep piano finish. So let's watch as the professional triggers his gun and does a 50% overlap.
In order to get even paint distribution across your workpiece. Each time you lay down a coat of paint, it should be in the opposite direction. Now, if you refer back to my video on the controls of the spray gun, remember that you can change the pattern direction from vertical to horizontal. So, for example, if I'm spraying a panel this way, my first coat, I get down across like that, I can take and turn the nozzle, and on my second coat, I can go like this, so that I've got an even distribution of paint on the panel.
The last thing I'll mention is when you may want to use a narrow fan pattern, such as spraying the edges of these louvered doors. By the way, I will never brush paint another set of louvered doors unless I'm forced into it. Finally, in our next video, I'll finish this lengthy series with a segment on cleaning your equipment. Oh, I almost forgot. Every once in a while, one of these little critters will land in your paint, and he won't just sit there and die. He'll flop around a little bit first. Anyhow, when I was painting cars, something like this would have cost me hundreds of dollars. Fortunately, this was on the prime coat.
If you have any comments or questions about this video, please post them and I'll certainly respond. So, with that said, hey, you make it a great day, and thanks for watching.
Check out our tools I use Amazon online store at www.budmanproductions.com. That's www.budmanproductions.com.